Yes, that's how many days my husband, who's Todd, can you raise your hand, please, sweetheart? There you go. Todd and I spent on the mission field in Madagascar and Kenya, and also, for me, a brief time in the paradise island of Mauritius, which is east of Madagascar. And so we're going to be talking about thriving or surviving, whichever one, hopefully thriving on the mission field. And how do we do that? And not only on the mission field, but in our pilgrimage of life, because we are on a pilgrimage. And so how do we survive on the mission field or even in life? Because we're doing, we're coming off of COVID. Life is busy. We're making a transition back to the United States. I'm finding the States culture really busy and very different than the African culture. And so how do we keep going in service to God? And how do we blend our lives? And how did we do it? So specifically, I'm going to be sharing our story because we are guests in God's world. That's the Benedictine philosophy. That's the name of my first book, A Guest in God's World. And how do we live that fullness of life in our everyday life, and all of the fullness of life that God gives us? Because we have a choice. We daily have a choice. And so our choice is, will we dance on the footpath of life? So, Forrest Gump, don't you love his quote, life is like a box of chocolates? You're never going to know what you're going to get. So my husband had a call for a long, long time to be a missionary, although when we first got married, we thought it was missions, and I was looking for my white picket fence and staying in the United States. I never dreamed that I was going to be a missionary. I never wanted to be a missionary, and I never really even knew that Episcopalians had missions. So when we decided to go into missions, our mission board, and we're SAMs, and they asked us, Pat, we really passed the test as husband and wife. They interviewed us, and that was all good, and then they separated us. Barely. And then they separated us and wanted to interview me and wanted to interview Todd, and so they're interviewing me, and they say, Patsy, can you tell us about your call into missions? And I'm like, me? My call into missions? I don't have a call into missions. And here we're going to go on the mission field. And they're like, what? Can you tell us more about that? I said, well, I want to be the best mom and wife that I can be, wherever I am. But call into missions? No. But I do believe that my husband has a call into missions. And I am ready to go with him to wherever God calls him. And so that ended up being Madagascar. And then 18 years after, then I finally find my call into missions. So sometimes it takes a while, but don't give up. God is always with us. And so whatever our situation is, we live out our baptismal covenant. So, and this is the first question in our baptismal covenant. Will you proclaim by word and example the good news of Jesus Christ? The good news of God in Christ. And will you do that? And will you do that in your neighborhood? Will you do that with a person across the street? And I was called to live that in Madagascar. So we're going to go quickly through 6 Celtic themes of evangelism. And this is taken by George Hunter's The Celtic Way of Evangelism. And this is the philosophy that my husband and I had on the mission field. First of all, to go to the people and to live among them, to learn from them, to love them, to start with what they know, and to build on what they have. And so first we had to go. And I know I'm stateside now for most of it. I mean, we have our partners worldwide, but that could mean across the street. That could mean in the grocery line. So we're not talking only long distances. We can be talking to the person right next to us. So for me, where did I need to go? And Todd and I, so we went to Madagascar. So if you know where it is, it's here off the coast of Mozambique, our neighbors. And I call it the Forgotten Island because Americans in their knowledge of Madagascar usually know about the Disney movie, and then they say, "Oh, is that a real island?" Now I realize I'm talking to the choir here because we're all missions focused, but Madagascar, it was not HIV, AIDS torn or war torn, but it is one of the most impoverished places on the world. So people would hear about it, but sort of forget about it. So we were called to go when our children were 11 months and 2 years old. So from the very beginning, it's a battlefield. From the very beginning, it's a battlefield. And if you read my first book, and they go in sequential order over there, because I didn't want the story to get lost from my kids. It starts with, I stared at the barrel of the gun. And that's exactly what happened on our trip over there, stopping the plane. And just, that was a horrific trip. And so from right off, it's a battlefield. And so how do we do that? How do we go? And I think we need to go smart. We need to go smart mentally and emotionally and physically and spiritually. And claim Ephesians 3. I continually prayed that God would give us mighty inner strength through the Holy Spirit. And that's a continual prayer. And so there we were with our two little kids and doing life in Madagascar. Not quite the white picket fence that I had anticipated. And so the Lord was asking Todd and I to go to the people and to live among them. And so I'm sort of going to look at these books too, because this is about our first 11 years in Madagascar in the capital called Antananarivo. This one's about the Diocese of Marsabit and where Campeche is from, and living in Nairobi and working in Kenya for 4 years. And then back to live in the slum. So they voted my husband to be Bishop of Madagascar down in the Diocese of Tuliar. And so we didn't have any housing because it's a missionary diocese. So we lived in what I call the box, which was in the slum. And this book is about that. It includes living next to the shaman and discipling his daughter, who actually became the first woman clergy in the Diocese of Tuliar. So I really had to go deep in my living situation because I wasn't used to living in a slum. I didn't ever live in a slum before. We lived in Tana and we lived in Marsabit, but those weren't slum-like situations. And so, have you ever had to walk forward in faith in spite of uncertainty? And that was what I was being called to do. And so I went all the way back to my baptismal covenant. And I was like, I don't know if you've ever heard Steve Green's very old song called Across the Street, Around the World, the mission's still the same, to proclaim the truth in Jesus' name. And so wherever we are in the world, that's what we're to do. And so I kept asking, what am I supposed to do? And the question really plagued me. And so I love Thomas Merton's quote here. A person has found their vocation when they stop thinking about how to live and just starts living. So we walked forward, and so I really, one of the foundations for me was emotional intelligence. And I know that's becoming more popular now, perhaps, than it was 20 years ago. But what is emotional intelligence and having strong mental health? Well, it's the capacity to be aware of and to control and express one's emotions, to handle interpersonal relationships judiciously and empathetically. And emotional intelligence is the key to both personal and professional success. And so, to take inventory, we call it a daily examine, to be aware of our situation and how we're dealing with that emotionally and mentally and spiritually. And so, I don't know if you've ever read any of Daniel Goleman's Emotional Intelligence or Peter Scazzero. Peter Scazzero has great podcasts on emotionally healthy church, emotionally healthy discipleship, and emotionally healthy spirituality. It's excellent. Those are 3 books of his excellent reads. So self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, going down deep, figuring out why we're motivated to do the things we're doing, and to have what kind of social skills do we have, and do we have that empathy? Whoopsies. I think I went. How do I go back one? Thank you, honey. Because I missed one slide. Is it this one?
Let's try this.
There we go. So there we go. We're not immune from trouble, but we don't have to run from it. And bravely, we face it with courage. And that's what I was having to deal with in Madagascar in my situation. And I'm sure you all have situations that you're having to embrace with courage, because life is life. And there's always situations that we need to embrace and face with courage, because the battle is not ours, but it's the Lord's. And so how is this all documented so that you can know in the short amount of time that we have? Well, we learned so many things. And we learned to be guests in God's world. And we took a little detour to Kenya, which really blessed us very, very much. And then back in Madagascar into a new area and the slum. This is not the view from the slum, but there's pictures in there of that. And then the very brand new, this is just even today, I have copies for this. This is the 4th book and the reflections about Madagascar and what, it's called Madagascar, the Window of My Soul, and what Madagascar taught me. Because we go as missionaries, but really we come back changed people. We go to change the world, but actually the world changes us. And so that's brand new just today. So I'm so excited about that. And so we went to go to the people, live with them, love them. And this was the big thing. And I think on any ministry, this is the big thing, this incarnational approach to ministry, and the Celtic approach, to love well. And so back to Peter Scazzero's books on emotionally healthy discipleship. How do you love well? How do we do that? Well, we need to enter into their world, walk in their shoes. I would spend time braiding hair with women just so that I could sit with them and enter into their world. But we also need to hold on to ourselves. We also need to remember who we are. And then live in that tension between the two. And I remember one time I was trying so hard to be a good missionary, and we were speaking Malagasy, and all the communication was in Malagasy, and just speaking the language and being with them, and then it suddenly dawned on me that, and I gave myself a break, and I thought, my skin color is never going to change. So as much as I tried to be just like the Malagasy, I was always going to be an American. And that was okay, because I needed to be myself. I needed to hold on to myself and to live into that tension. So, of course, Mother Teresa, my favorite, not all of us can do great things, but we can all do small things with great love. And this is what I learned. This is what I learned on the mission field. This is what I was taught. Because the African community, you all know how to love one another. It's beautiful, and you've taught me how to love. And so then, as we go through the Celtic way, we go to the people, we live among them, we love them, we learn from them, and then we start with what they know. And what do they know? They know how to love. And so this was the big learn for me was we, the church, need to love well and have a passionate love for people. We can do have as many things on our to-do list as we can, but if we're not loving, if it's not penetrating into the people because of our love, then it's all in vain. And so I wrote this poem called A Hand Holder. People ask me, what do you do? I try to think of something impressive in the world's view. Nothing comes to mind, and I humbly say, I try to love people in the Lord's way. I'm sorry, they reply. You didn't hear what I said. They don't understand. What do you do is the question I dread. Not really anything, again, was my reply, as I took a deep breath and let out a long sigh. I try to love people in the Lord's way, but the world is not impressed, as this does not take in much pay. They want to know, what do you really do, rather than love one another and walk in one's shoes. A hand holder, that's my answer. That's what I'm called to be. This goal is not impressive for others to see. But if the Lord were here at our side today, it may be the answer he would say. Be a hand holder for the young and the old, the simple, the elegant, the rich, and the poor. These are children of mine. I've created each race. Hold their hands and walk at their pace. So my husband's a bishop, and I think I was also having a little bit of a identity crisis because I didn't have anything to say. And when I wrote this poem, I had just become a priest, but we were living in a slum. We didn't have a whole lot of things that we could not a whole lot of fruits at that point. We were starting with what they knew. So, but I think that identity crisis was actually the root of where we all come from, is that seed, that love. So the African theology of I am because we are, I love it, we're together, that's why we do what we do, and that's who we are, the threads that intertwine. And so then the last part of this Celtic Christianity, this Celtic evangelism, is to build on what they have. And so after we go through going and learning and loving and starting with what they know, and we build on what they have, and relationships. What is the priority in Africa, in Madagascar, in Mauritius? It's really relationships. So we're people who reach people wherever we are in the world. And that's been our motto as we've gone throughout life on the mission field, is that we are people who reach people. And so people will not care how much we know until they know how much we care. And we're people reaching people with family, and family is first among everything. One would never turn down a family gathering or an event. We're people reaching people with community. That's one of our churches there. Oh, I'm timed. I'm all done. And relationships with guests. The guest is always seen as a blessing. And however little food we have, we'll share it, even if it's one locust, is a Malagasy proverb. And then we did build on what they had. We built the Women's Center, we built a labyrinth, and we built, there's the first St. Patrick's Cathedral there in the Diocese of Tuliar, and then there's the current St. Patrick's Cathedral there. So Micah 6:8, act justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God. And when we do this, then we will have the ripple effect into our communities. So there we go.